Good afternoon, everybody.
Hi,
Thank
good
you so much.
afternoon.
Thank you so much for joining. This is a webinar that we are doing in collaboration with Katharina, and is regarding how to simplify systematic reviews. So we are very honored to have Katharina, who is an expert in performing these reviews. So we hope to have a very practical overview over this process, but as well just to cover any other type of feedback that we gather through those systematic reviews processes. Obviously, the systematic review processes, they link to many other processes as CERs and many other type of reporting. So we will not cover that. We will focus on the systematic review, literature review processes, Katharina and myself. And our goal is how to leverage software automations and knowledge. So we need to find the balance between both. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. And Katharina, obviously, thank you so much for being here. Right.
Thanks for having me.
So let's just start. We're going to do this in a very conversation type of webinar as well, so we can exchange as well different type of information from both sides as well. So if I can move this to the next item. So we have an agenda. First, systematic literature review process, when and why, project planning, appraisal criteria, literature searches, how to review research results, extract, synthesize, analyze information, reporting, traceability and data evidence management. And then we're going to discuss a MedBoard case using those steps through automation, as well as change with Katharina, different type of how she does specific steps, how she uses different type of automation, and as well how she can obviously get the most of these tools. So the first, obviously, introduction. So Katharina, obviously, thank you so much for being with us. So you can introduce yourself and let everybody know about yourself. Yes.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me here again. So my name is Katharina Friedrich. I work as a consultant for regulatory writing. So performing systematic literature researches is part of my daily business, I would say. I have a medical background and spent a few years working as an orthopedic and trauma surgeon, but left the hospital in 2018 and joined Becton Dickinson as a medical writer. So that was quite exciting because it was just 1 year after the introduction or implementation of the MDR. So I had the chance to learn a lot about MDR. I had the chance to perform clinical evaluations for different types of devices, including many literature searches. And I also planned a lot of PMCF strategies. So since 2021, I'm self-employed. I work as a consultant for different medical device companies, and my focus is usually the regulatory documentation. So most of the days I do clinical evaluations and PMCF strategies for different medical devices. And I'm also a lecturer at the Bern University of Applied Sciences and talk about clinical evaluations and systematic literature reviews. So I think that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Katharina. So we can say that you do this day after day.
Yeah,
so you were
true.
very involved with these processes. It's not something that you do once per year or even once per quarter. You are continuously working through these processes. So it's very valuable to have you here as well, because obviously you have some feedback from the authorities as well, from different submissions as well from your side. So regarding myself, so I have background in science as well, business. I've been involved 15 years in the industry. So obviously, I always joke that the clinical evaluation reports and systematic literature reviews that I used to see more than 10 years ago were 3 pages. So obviously, life has changed so much since, obviously, for a better, obviously, standards and much higher quality as well. So I've been involved with a lot of projects, a lot of regulatory submissions, EU, US as well, global, involved in many processes from clinical to regulatory R&D. So I work with a small, medium and size company and big companies. Obviously, the size matters. Not everybody has the same resources or the time or the same type of attitude as well as solving the problems. And as well, I've been a speaker. I'm a speaker with different events and expert panels. And then I'm mentor and tutor as well for university students for STEM subjects. So that's about myself. So I've been around for a long time. I've seen the evolution. You've been involved since you said MDR before, it was slightly different, but obviously it has evolved, massively the industry since. So I'm gonna go to the next slide, and I think the first question that we want to emphasize is when and why, right? So I'll leave you to explain, Katharina, from your perspective.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, first of all, I'm always a bit biased because I mainly work for the medical device industry, but I think most of the opportunities to perform a systematic literature review can also be leveraged to pharma, I guess. So one of the, or a common reason to perform a systematic literature review is definitely before and during product development. And I think that's something that many companies still don't do. So I often get requests from companies who already have a completely developed product, and during the product development, no one really did a systematic literature review. And I think it's super important because it gives you a lot of information about potential needs out there, also to get a really good understanding of a medical condition, of different treatment options. Also unmet needs, of course, it gives you a lot of information about design inputs, risk related to other devices, and how you can maybe avoid them with developing your own device. So I think it's super important to already do a systematic research before and during product development. Also, of course, for clinical trials and studies, not only for the protocol and the relevant endpoints, but also for all the statistics. So we need robust information from literature to have a good justification for our sample size calculation. Then, of course, especially when it comes to all the regulatory documentation related to medical devices, we have the state-of-the-art evaluation. That's a big part with systematic literature reviews to give us a good understanding of medical conditions, alternative treatment options, the benefit-risk profile of other devices on the market. And of course, also with the MDR, post-market surveillance and post-market clinical follow-up have become more important. And literature searches also play an important role in this part. And I think that's the same for pharmacovigilance, even though I'm not that experienced in this topic. And of course, for the clinical evaluation in general. So when we search for information for our own device, we also have to perform systematic literature reviews. So these were all the reasons when to perform a systematic literature review. And I think I also explained most of the reasons why to do it. So yeah, in general, to get a better understanding of the whole background, the medical conditions, especially with the MDR and the new regulations, it's also super important to really identify appropriate benchmark devices and find a way how you can compare your own device to other devices on the market. It helps you to identify relevant risks and also gaps in the clinical evidence. And especially when we talk about clinical investigations, it also helps you to define relevant endpoints for a clinical study protocol and also to compare your device to other devices on the market. So I think there are many more options when you can perform a systematic literature review, but at least in my daily business, these are the most important ones.
And one message, Katharina, we want to emphasize as well that it's important to monitor continuously the regulatory updates and inputs, right? Because depending on the guidance, depending on regulations, depending on the interpretation of the existing rules, specific actions or specific reporting or inputs in the plan will need to be required. If we see, for example, the role, as you mentioned before, in the PMS. PMS 10 years ago was about gathering some complaints, dividing into sales, and get some vigilance data and so on. Obviously, now literature is playing a very important role into the PMS and monitoring as well, that type of safety and performance information. So one of the key things as well is to ensure you have an effective regulatory intelligence process, especially aligned with the goals that obviously you are going to perform within your task as well. So if your processes are for CR or for example, PNCF, PMS, obviously keep up to date with any information that is related to that, because the interpretation may change, new regulations, new guidance, new formats to present information may change as well. So that's very important. That's one of the key things that have changed. So thank you so much, Katharina, for this overview. Moving to the next one, right? So we wanted to touch base on how to simplify, right? And when we look into how to simplify, it's a balance in the end. Is how to or when to use the knowledge and when to use the technology.
Yeah.
And we need to know when to use the knowledge and when to use the technology, right? And very important, especially coming from a regulatory industry, because we are obviously placing, or we are talking about systematic literature review process within regulatory or regulated industries, as we are, medtech, pharma, and so on. It has to have a structured process. And when we say a structured process, very well-defined step-by-step, a documented process with the clear objectives and good design review, right? So one of the key things as well is how do we place ourselves so the technology can do the not added value added task, and then the professionals like yourself with the experience and knowledge you have, you can employ your time in those value added tasks, right? What is your view related to that, Katharina? Like what's been as well for you the experience sometimes maybe like not finding that balance?
Yeah, definitely. So I think I can tell a bit about an example that I think it was about 2 years ago, where I had to do a systematic literature review for a client, and they had a very comprehensive process for their clinical evaluation. So a lot of documentation, a lot of information that had to be copied from A to B. And as a medical writer, when I had to do all this, all the screening and data processing and copying information from A to B, I realized that I was so focused on all this editorial work, I would say. So all the tasks that, I don't know, could have been done maybe by a software, that I really didn't had the chance to really take a closer look into the literature, right? So I really lost my focus. And I think it's very important, especially with the increasing requirements to systematic literature reviews, with the increasing requirements to regular updates, to find a good option how you can really focus on the important things. So the things where you really need an expert, and to save some time for all the tasks that don't necessarily have to be performed by an expert. I think that's super important.
I agree, and I think that's one of the key parts, well, to understand that balance, right? It's ironic as well in some organizations, some professionals, they use AI tools to replace them in the knowledge base, but then they do manually and copy and paste in Excels, right?
And it
So I
should be the
think
other way
this
around.
is more like a data engineering problem right now. Can we substitute those not value-added tasks and, copying and pasting, or, doing calculations by automation rather than just the decision making? Because the decision making either by you or someone else is an expert is what makes difference as well than interpretation. So that's the value added for everybody. So one of the things that we want to emphasize is using the technology for those processes or tasks that are related to, and as well how we can maximize those tasks that are related more for knowledge and professional input. So we all want more control, more predictability, more productivity, more professional job satisfaction. So probably it's related to what you said before, Katharina. So probably you feel more realized in terms of, okay, I'm using my brain on the task that I should be using instead of just trying to match the numbers in the Prisma. And obviously more traceability, data management as well, less time errors and effort. So I think that's the goal for everybody as well. And to simplify, again, we need to have structured processes to obviously continuously follow them. So now the question is about the project planning, right? So Katharina, I want you to go over this, and what are your thoughts related to how to plan these activities?
Yeah, I think planning has become very important. Also, especially in the medical device world, with the MDR. So you probably all know that we need a clinical evaluation plan, we need a PMCF plan. In general, when we do a search, we are supposed to document a literature search plan. So it became super important to really document what you do and also really clearly define what you want to do. And I think it's really important. It's not only a regulatory necessity, also when you think about maybe changes in a company, repeating a literature search is super important to have all the information to know, okay, this is what I have to do to update a literature search, for example, or to continue a literature search. So the planning is really important. And that's why I always try to really have a precise goal in my search plan, and to already define criteria for appraisal. And of course, it's also one of the regulatory requirements, especially when we think about the clinical evaluation. So for my planning, I need to define my search strategy and the rationale for it. And I also have to define the scope of the whole project, because of course it makes a difference whether I want to do a systematic literature review for a state-of-the-art evaluation or for product development, because in this case, I rather have, or I usually have, a very broad scope. But when I really want to do a systematic review just for a clinical study protocol, then I can really tailor my search string to this specific question that I have. So defining the scope is super important in the project planning. And then, of course, I also have to define, okay, who will execute the plan and the activities. So I can create a very comprehensive and extensive literature search strategy, but also there has to be someone to really go through all the search results and extract the information, appraise the information. So that's also part of the planning. And yeah, depending on what I want to do, there must be specific information in it, especially when it's for a regulatory process, I think. Then I have to document even more details than for maybe a scoping search for a product development.
And that's one of the things that have changed massively, right? Is to document the plan. Before it was not required. And as well, one thing that we see as well from MedBoard and so on, that sometimes people come to do searches without actually having a plan, and they start to just to throw different searches without actually a proper plan on goal. So one of the key things that we see as well is, obviously, the appraisal process or the plan you create has to answer the question. Obviously, has to be valuable as well to the data sets where you are reviewing. So that's very important in terms of the planning, obviously documented, and to have the goal, right, in terms of the, obviously, it has become a much more extensive work, let's say, Katharina, right, to document all of this. But I think it's a really good practice, obviously, to come and to prepare as well when the work has to be done as well.
Yeah, right. And also depending on the scope, you can maybe, make a literature search a bit easier for this one scope, and it can be a bit more comprehensive for a regulatory process. So it always depends what you want to do and what you want to document, and what's the purpose behind it, right? So, and that's why it's important that you don't just apply the same criteria for your literature search for every project. It can make sense to really adapt them according to your needs.
Right. So let's start with the plan, right? So the first thing is to have a plan. The plan has two important areas, right? The appraisal and the searches, right? So let's start with the appraisal criteria, and, like an overview as well, like in terms of, how to appraise the literature.
Yeah. So I think appraisal criteria are really usually a thing that is used for regulatory purposes. So when you conduct a search, for example, for a clinical evaluation, then you are supposed to apply the most objective way to really go through your different publications and appraise them. And I think still the most popular way to do it is this coding according to the IMDRF guidance, where you have different criteria at first for data suitability and others for data contribution. And this is something that is still commonly used in clinical evaluations, because it gives you the chance to appraise publications according to the device type, the indication, but also according to things like outcomes, follow-up, study design, and so on. And to me, that's the appraisal that I still see in most of the templates from my clients. And it's, quite a good way to do the appraisal for clinical evaluations. I like to add a bit more information usually in my appraisal when I can use my own templates, because I like to put a bit more granularity to the publications, and that's something where what I can do with the level of evidence. So there is this Oxford level of evidence where you can differentiate between high quality studies such as RCTs or systematic reviews, and then you have different steps until the lowest level, level 5, and this would be expert opinions. So this is something that I like to add to the data contribution and data suitability criteria.
So Katharina, what is your perfect recipe then for this then?
Yeah, so I usually do a slight modification when I have the chance. So what I don't like about these IMDRF appraisal criteria is that, at least for the second table, you only have the answer yes or no. And I think sometimes there's also something in between. So I usually have a scoring system that is based on the statistical power of a publication. So I usually define a scope to say, okay, I want publications with at least 50 patients, depending on the device and indication. Then I also do an appraisal according to the technology, to the interventions and outcomes. And this is then, or then I have like a scoring system to come up with a number. And in addition, I also do a bias assessment for the publications. That's something that is often required by the FDA, but I like it a lot because you can take a closer look how the cohorts in a study were selected, how do the cohorts compare to each other, and I can also take a closer look at how outcomes were assessed and how if the follow-up was appropriate or not. So that's my preferred recipe. Of course, this IMDRF coding is definitely right, and also notified bodies accepted. But I like, or this is my preferred option.
And that's something to emphasize, right? That every professional or every reviewer may have a different appraisal criteria as long as it's suitable for the goal or for the regulatory processes that they're going to perform. As well, my personal opinion, maybe IMDRF is missing a bit the scoring system, but obviously quantitatively is quite, for the grading system, it's quite difficult then to grade in a very visual or numeric way as well. And sometimes obviously reviewers are notified by they're asking more, okay, which ones are grading higher, lower, and it's much more difficult to define obviously with those and the RF. From our points from MedBoard, what we said is obviously build your forms according to the evaluation plan and data. So as Katharina has on, may have single select or free text answers or tables. Predefined answers are better for data management. So then you don't have much variability after when you are actually doing the review. Very important as well is when you build your forms or your questions, whether you're going to do in the screening phase or you're going to do in the full text review. And as well, as I mentioned before, considering using the scores because obviously it can help you. So Katharina is adding those scores on top of the IMDRF, and obviously that's because it's helping you during the review process. And as well, and we will get into more detail as well to identify any article that in principle look good, but after the grading, it doesn't perform very well. So you can obviously exclude that.
Yeah.
So in terms of the literature searches, so what is your approach going to literature searches as well during the planning?
Yeah, so to get started, I really like to apply this PICO framework because it really helps me a lot to make sure that I consider all relevant search terms for my search. So this PICO framework is based on the population, the intervention, any comparisons, and the outcomes that are relevant for my literature search or for a specific device. And I don't necessarily combine all this information from the PICO framework. I rather use it to define or to identify relevant search terms. And then before really documenting my search strings, I usually start with a scoping search. I know that also some people already document the scoping search. I think that's also fine. But I like to really play around a bit with my search terms and build the search strings in different databases, because also not every search string is suitable for every database. So I usually have to make adaptations for my search in PubMed versus Cochrane versus Embase versus Google Scholar. So that's something that you have to identify during the scope. And what I also do when I think, okay, this is a good search string for my database, I do a very brief screening, maybe of the, I don't know, first 20 results to make sure, okay, this is the type of information that I want to have for my literature search. And then I really define the concrete search strings that I also document in my protocol.
So you test your queries in the source database, right? Just to get a sense of, how many results are you getting, but what's the quality in terms of when you're reviewing those results. That's correct, right?
Right. Yeah, because I think that's the only way to also come to a conclusion whether I have to apply any filters, because of course somehow the search results must be manageable. I don't want to screen 2,000 results for very simple literature search. Then I might have to add either some further search terms to narrow my search, or I can also use filters to focus on a specific publication type, to define the search period, and so on. And for this, I usually do the scoping search to make sure that I don't miss any relevant information.
And do you change your query depending on the database? And is this an important part when you are scoping as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think in general, different databases have their pros and cons for different parts of my literature search. So for example, Embase is super good when I want to search for device-specific information. And also Google Scholar is super good when I want to search for device-specific information. Google Scholar is not good when I want to get information about the medical background, because usually I end up with 2,000 results and have no chance to really screen them in an appropriate way. So I tailor the search strings to the different databases. And I think the testing is super important to avoid unnecessary work, but also to avoid that you miss relevant information.
And I think that a lot of people don't know as well that different databases and search engines, they work, completely different. And
that's
even
true.
from PubMed, for example, is the most used. It's only searching in the title and the abstract. But if you go to PubMed Central, it's searching as well in the full text, right?
Yeah.
And obviously that extension of wording, it can have, and I have an example for later, it can just give you 10 times more results. So obviously it's something to be mindful as well when, defining and all the strategies. Sometimes, based on experience as well, like thousands of searches performed or through our platform, searches or design of those searches normally are one of the number one cause of problems down the line in the literature. So obviously selecting the right queries for the right databases, understanding sometimes I say, oh, this result doesn't give me any results. Yes, maybe because you tried before in a very less restrictive database. Now you are in a very restricted database and you are not finding results with that same query. So it's very important to use, obviously, the knowledge, the experience, the brains as well, how to maximize and to get the value based on the question that the literature review has to answer. So one question I have is, do you document then all of this information? So do you create a table? Do you document how you search? And what are the characteristics of each database?
Yeah, right. And that's super important, especially when you already know that you have to repeat the same literature search maybe 2 years later. So of course, I document the database, really the exact search string, all the filters that I used, of course, also the search period. So all the information that is needed to really make sure that someone else could conduct the same search and would come to the same results as I did. Yeah.
Right. And then obviously executing the searches. So this is the first time we see an icon that is like a laptop. So this is as well to emphasize that until this point, the design, the intent of the literature review is very based on the knowledge and experience of the professional or the team. So that's very focused on obviously the professional, how it's going to approach it, the processes they have. Obviously, from this moment, then there could be a more combination between, or with, automated processes or software, and as well the knowledge of the person, right? So executing the searches, it could be, for example, through our platform, automated methods or importing rich formats, record the results, having a log that's always very documented. Sometimes reviewers or auditors don't understand that the same query in the same period may give different results. And that's why some articles get removed, some articles get added after the period. So documenting all this information is very important. So you have the evidence that time, that moment, those were the results. And obviously, if you use a lot of different databases with different fields searchable, then it's a task, obviously, to merge the results. So before start reviewing the results, there is a task that, obviously, if you use a platform like MedBoard and so on, it's automated, but otherwise you will need to merge all the results and matching all the fields, together. So one thing that we want to emphasize, Katharina and myself, is there is no magic formula that a software is going to design how to do a systematic review process or literature. You need to obviously understand the context, the intent, the goal, and then build based on that. Obviously, the queries is a very important part. You can obviously use different tools to help, but the professional is the maximum responsible to actually ensure that that query is going to answer the literature review question that we're going to address. So we went through the whole plan. Obviously, now everything is documented. And obviously, the review, the search results, this could be another webinar, just speaking about this. So we're going to just go, over this a bit quickly, But I just want to give you, or you can give us an overview how you normally approach this in terms of, the process in overall.
Yeah. So I usually start with the title and abstract screening. I know that some people at this stage only decide whether to include or exclude something without further documentation. I usually prefer also documenting the reasons for exclusion also in the title and abstract screening. Because sometimes I have the situation that I excluded information and later on I realize, okay, maybe it's still important for my purpose. And then I can easily identify the things that I excluded and consider them if needed. And that's what I do in the title and abstract screening, really a very brief review of the abstracts. And then I end up with a number of articles where I go into the full text screening. And this is usually something that includes a bit more work. So here I go into the full text. Usually I use the same criteria to include or exclude this for further data extraction or data appraisal. And for the ones that are really relevant for my purpose, I already extract the information regarding appraisal criteria and any other information that I would like to have for my scoring. So also including the level of evidence for my publications. And what really helped me for the screening process, both for the title and abstract screening, but also for the full text review, is the highlight of keywords. So this is something that I usually already define during my scoping search. So I know keywords that are definitely relevant for my scope. And I also know keywords that would usually result in the exclusion of an article. And when they are highlighted, it makes the screening just way more faster. So that's something that I really like in MedBoard.
So essentially, you're using, again, your knowledge and experience to apply those specific keywords that may give you signals, whether an article could be relevant or not relevant as well. Depending on the reviewer, some of them prefer to add this appraisal information only at the end, but you're saying that you prefer, if you see an article is going to be a candidate to be a full text review, you are already starting to fill that in, right? So you have that approach with the review process.
Correct, yeah.
So one of the key things as well, and again, for us to emphasize, is Katharina is making the decision making, whether something is relevant, not relevant. She's building, obviously, or you are building the different signals for seeing, obviously, to organize automatically the results or to identify duplicates or to use the filters, because obviously you have the database, you can use filters. So you can start the review with RCTs or with a higher quality in terms of evidence. perform changes or bulk exclusions or scores, calculations, or features to accelerate the review. One thing that is very well used through our platform is if it tells you whether an article has already been reviewed by a person or by your team. So obviously you can have a quick peek and see, okay, if it's been excluded because the low quality of the review, you don't need to spend another 5 minutes, going through the document. Another thing that I don't know if is very important for you as well is whether to identify as well from which query the article is coming from. This is something that's getting more requested as well, not only from customers, but from reviewers, in order to have that traceability, to understand, okay, this result, where it's coming, which database, which query has returned this result.
Yeah, it's also important for me. I mean, for some cases, that's also some information that some of my clients really want to have in their documentation. For myself, it's more relevant because I usually have like search queries that provide me results, for example, about the general medical background. And I have other search queries that are tailored to similar devices or to my own device. And having these filters makes it a bit easier when I then summarize the information. So I can filter for the publications that are relevant for my benchmark devices, for the background, and so on. So it's a bit more structured.
So let's go to the next step. Obviously, this takes a specific amount of work, obviously, to review all the processes. Let's imagine you already had the full text review articles. So how you approach this specific process?
Yeah, so usually I have more or less the same kind of information that I want to extract, especially when it comes to regulatory documents such as the clinical evaluation. And for this purpose, I have like a data extraction table, where I usually start with some general information about the study, including the study design, the population, and so on. And then I have a separate section for all the outcome measures, because these are very important, especially for quantifying the information about performance, safety, and benefits. And then I also want to have a section where I can extract some information about potential limitations, but also the general conclusions of a publication. And usually this table looks more or less the same for different purposes. But of course, when I have a really targeted literature search, it can also be just reduced to 1 or 2 outcome parameters. It really depends a bit on the scope.
So you are the one deciding, obviously, what has to be extracted based on, again, the goal. Obviously, if anything changes from the plan, is documented as a deviation. We will cover that in the next slide. And from our side, what we see is the use of technology obviously can help to search and extract information, but obviously that person has to verify or get that information confirmed, to upload PDFs automated, to use custom filters. This is very useful as well to filter by the scoring or by the different answers as well. So you have a much better, a more flexible way to review the information in terms of like qualitative and quantitative as well. And the other thing is documenting. Sometimes and I remember myself doing this many years ago, is you end up with one document here with the comments in another place, the actions, the task, and another, the annotation. So obviously having everything linked together to that review, it can help massively to the reviewer, again, to do less admin tasks, or wasting time trying to just get that information from different sizes. One of the things that, as well, Katharina and we wanted to talk in this about AI, right? So from the perspective that we were discussing, and we have one example here with Gemini, right, about what's the main difference between a source and a dressing is their purpose. And then obviously for dressing, it got a bit confused with the wound dressings, is whether you use manual methods, predefined software forms, AI, machine learning, or Gen AI that now is more like a trend. Is any of these processes, for any of these processes, you always need to review the outcome and verify and record where the evidence is. So you always need to balance whether you're going to do faster. So if you're already familiar with the output of the information, so maybe manual is going to be better. If use a different type of like systems like predefined software, forms, or AI with machine learning that is going to indicate where the information is, or Gen AI, at the end, you just need to verify the information, right? So I think both we are on the same, page with this, Katharina, right? So what are your views related to this? Is anyone can use any other method? So both, obviously, there are specific verification that has to be done.
Yeah, I think the verification always needs to be done. I tried a few tools for the data extraction part, because it's also, I mean, it's not my favorite one. And I think that's, probably the same for most of the people working in the regulatory field. But verifying the information is super important. And especially with medical devices and the publications, I think they are not yet that standardized to really, make it possible that AI extracts all the information, because in many times the information is just hidden in the text. There are totally different ways to describe outcomes and complications. And I think it still makes sense that, a human being reads the publication and gets the most relevant information out of it.
I think in the end, depending on the professional, whatever method feels more comfortable, as long as obviously the quality is there, right? So from our side as well, we see that we have AI tools to extract the information. Is the inputs, the articles are so diverse as well that it's quite difficult, obviously, to convey this within the same output. So that's our message. You can use any, but obviously you need to verify the output, and you are responsible for that. And then just to finalize, always about reporting. So obviously, what are your views, obviously, in terms of reporting, how to present that information? We are only focusing on literature review, but what are your views as well in terms of reporting? I guess now the work is finished, so it's just about to exporting or to extract the information as you wish.
Yeah. So usually that's the information that I put, for example, as an appendix to my document. For example, for the clinical evaluation, I want to have an overview with all the information of my title and abstract screening, including all the reasons for inclusion and exclusion. Then, of course, I also want to have a table with all the included articles and the appraisal. I need my Prisma flowchart, and that's something where I often lost a lot of time before starting working with MedBoard, because I always had a mismatch with the numbers. And of course, as you also just mentioned before, if there were some deviations from my initial plan, I also have to document them, right? If I decided to exclude a certain type of publications or include a certain type of publications, it just needs to be documented.
So more than anything, what is required is data engineering, data management as well, to extract the information that you need. I'm aware as well, some notified bodies, auditors, authorities, they want to see as well the duplicates list. So as well, it's about to extracting that information, but as well extract, obviously, or they want as well to see the full text not relevant. We encounter with that as well. So obviously, you need to be ready to present the data that is requested. So you have all documented. And as well, another thing that you mentioned about the Prisma, it happened to me before. Maybe an article had changed the specific status, review status, and then it changes completely all the numbers. It changes completely as well, all the extraction, and obviously creates more admin work for the person. So from our side, obviously, it's about how to automate those in terms of data engineering, but as well allowing how you can create customized reports based on filters on a specific time period. So I don't know if you do that, Katharina, but we see as well some professionals, what they do a filter based on a higher quality evidence, and they do a Prisma based on that as well. So they can see whether any of the highest quality evidence, RCTs, high-level systematic reviews, those are coming into the full text relevant. Do you do something like this as well from your sides to test the output?
Usually not for the clinical evaluation, but I did it for an HTA that I started working on. And there it was really helpful to really start with, the high quality studies, and then working my way down to the lower ones. And then I could decide, okay, I can focus on these ones, or I should also consider the other ones. Yeah.
Right. And that can give you as well a good sense how whether you are meeting those goals, right, with the evidence that you have created.
Yeah.
The last bit we wanted to cover as well is traceability and evidence management, right? So you're going to need to obviously this outcome of this process will go normally into a report, publication, or similar. So obviously you will need to start writing the CR, extracting the information. If you are from MedTech, if you are from other type of industries, you will need to follow different processes. But obviously from our side as well, in terms of data management requirements, is how to retrieve the information instantly, especially related to articles review, excluded, duplicated, store those articles safely as well, so you can always access that in the future, leverage internal knowledge for future review. So Katharina, you have already done a review in an article and you encounter that article in 1 year, you would like to just reuse the work you have done. And obviously you work with a team, you would like to reuse all that work together as well. And that can save obviously a lot of time and effort, and as well as standardization, because through that transparency, maybe you find as well ways to improve the previous review. And as well, it helps to go back to articles and understand why. That's one of the key things as well, like is very poor these days, is going back to those articles, understanding why, right? Where is that evidence? Because after like 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, you forget about it, right? So, from our side as well as how we can help to manage once that the systematic review evidence is being created, how to manage that evidence. So do you find as well a challenge as well, how to store this information, how to retrieve previous reviews? Obviously doing through Excel, always been a challenge, because then it's difficult to retrieve that back. But what is your experience as well after the literature review, going back to those results? What is your experience?
I think it's especially important really for companies with larger teams. So I made the experience also with some of my clients that different groups were working at more or less the same literature searches, just without really knowing what the others already did. And then maybe the different people appraised the same article 3 or 4 times without knowing. And therefore, I think it's super important to have, a good database where you can store all this information and make it accessible for everyone, to just avoid this unnecessary duplicated work.
Great. So now we have finished, obviously, the process. What we wanted now is to go through some practical use as well. We have one example as well with the same query, how diverse those results are as well. So we have 10 minutes. We're going to cover different type of those processes as well. We'll ask you like a few questions as well, from our side as well, Katharina. So I'm going to move this to hopefully to the right place in here. And one of the key things, I have my super systematic review project, and starting my super systematic review project in here. One of the key things that you mentioned before is about searches and appraisal criteria. So I built here already, so all the criteria for relevant, not relevant, your custom questions. I gave some scoring. I love scoring, so it's not much easier to quantify, but the whole process for suitability and contribution are here. Score calculations, reasons for exclusions, and custom keyword highlighting that we know that you especially like this feature in the platform. But one thing that I wanted to cover is in literature searches, right? So I imported as well from Cochrane already. I'm using exactly the same query, right? And this is a practical example to see that I use exactly the same query. So I can go here, I can see when from the 1st of January 2023, I run it once, and then I have my execution log telling me how many articles are in this one. But we can see as well from exactly the same query, we run that in PubMed, DOAJ, PubMed Central, PNC Europe, Cochrane, and the results are so diverse, right? So we are getting in PubMed Central more than 3,000, where in PubMed we're getting 120. So what would you do in this situation, Katharina?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, then I really have to think about what is the best, or what are the best databases for the purpose of my search. So does it make sense to really consider all these results from PubMed Central? depending on what I want to do, that's the answer would be yes. But of course, I can also see, depending on the results that I get from the different databases, if all the databases also provide relevant results, or maybe I have to adapt the search term in one of the specific databases to make sure that I also get results that are relevant for my scope.
So the test is very important, right? So
The
what you're
test
saying
is
as well, that
important.
the test is very important in that sense. You know, on our platform as well, people can upload the risk formats,
Yeah.
for example, like Cochrane. So it is how you're like combining different type of databases and understanding which databases are going to provide value to you. In our
Yeah.
platform as well, you can filter by results. So you can filter by those or just by the PubMed. So that makes it very easy as well, just to sub-filter or to examine those results. One thing I wanted to cover as well is obviously in the screening process. So I already created some relevant articles. Obviously, merging all the results is a very labor-intensive work. Here it's all organized. It just gives you the title screening. So and then you can create sub-searches as well based on different filters. So one of the things that you like very much is as well the highlighting, as we can see in here, and going to the different items as well for the highlighting. So if I go in here, and as well, you can use the analyzer as well if you want to in different processes. So in this case, one thing that I wanted to emphasize, I'm going to choose, for example, this one, and then so how you can use an analyzer as well. So you just extract the information, and it's not going to give you all the answers. It can give you some indication. For example, in this case, it just tells you where that information can be found as well within the document. And the other thing is, when you have created those questions, obviously you can create tasks, you can create comments. You have the query. So this one is coming from PubMed Central. These are the queries. Obviously, this is a demo query. This is not obviously based on a real case. And as well, what we discussed before, another important feature is to leverage as well whether this has been reviewed. So I can see related reviews. So I reviewed this in another project together. So that's one of the key things for extraction. Obviously, in the forms that we have in here, then is when you can have the screening or the questions that you created as well to have the scoring systems as well in here. So one thing that I wanted to ask you is what happens if you have all the relevant? So you have the custom filters. This is actually a cool feature that you can just filter by the actual device, same use, minor deviation. So you can just have more a quotation to the specific quality of or the specific group of articles. But do you do as well? So I'm going to do it now. If you see, for example, score of 4, 3, and 2, what would you do then if you find those in your rate of scoring? Will you go back? For example, I'm going to review this. Would you go there inside and do you exclude them, or how do you do that specific process?
Yeah, that depends a little bit on the amount of evidence I have, I would say. I mean, you probably also know, especially when it comes to medical devices, we often have the situation that there's not too much high quality evidence. And of course, I don't want to, do my clinical evaluation just with 2 RCTs and then just ignore all the retrospective studies that were done for publication. But I mean, there are certain areas also in medical devices where I then could see, okay, there is really a lot of robust evidence from higher quality studies. And then I can think about, okay, maybe it makes sense to exclude the other ones. But if I decide so, then I also have to document it and provide a justification why it makes sense. I think that's important to note.
Right. So you will do a threshold where if they are lower than that, maybe you go inside and say, okay, this is going to be not relevant, and the reason is going to be outside of the scoring is. We will have a one that says the scoring is below the endpoint. One thing I wanted to, obviously the Prisma that we covered before. So we have Prisma 2020. So obviously it's easier to find all this information in here. I'm going to remove the filters. The Prisma is very cool on our side that it just adapts to those filters as well. So if someone wants to do those filters only using the actual device, can do it as well very easily. So obviously this is why it takes a lot of time after changing one to another. And then just to finalize, what we wanted to cover as well is in the export side. So obviously we have the export, we have a function as well to add the reference manager. And I think that's one of the key things. Where do we put all these documents when this is completed? So we have this magic button here to add a reference manager, and we have a reference manager, right? So we offer this included. So then you can have all the references with the files. People can add as well the different tags. So if I look into, for example, this article, it's going to tell me, for example, related reviews, that I reviewed this in my super systematic review project. Very easily, I can just click in here. It's going to take me exactly where that's been reviewed. So that obviously helps massively in terms of the traceability. And the other feature as well, in terms of reference manager, whether you use a reference manager, you use your own solutions in a document management system, obviously is to use tags, to use groups. So obviously you can have always those specific articles searchable and easy to filter, right? So I know we are arriving to the time. Now to 5 o'clock here in the UK. So obviously we cover all the steps more theoretically, and now we've been through like practically some of the challenges in here. What would be your final remarks as well, Katharina, for this webinar?
Yeah. So final remarks. Maybe to just sum up what you already mentioned at the beginning. So I think working with a tool like MedBoard is super helpful. Also for me, I thought a lot about whether it makes sense because I'm only this one person doing it, but it really saved me a lot of time. But still you need expertise and knowledge to define the right scope, define your search strategy. But I think it's a great tool to really focus on the more important tasks that more need your brain and spend less time on all this repetitive work, such as creation of the tables, export all the documentation, and so on.
So we are talking here as well about job satisfaction, right? So
yeah,
as well,
definitely.
Like you feel more using your time and added value task. And obviously, as we described before, in the first steps for the planning, the appraisal criteria planning, the literature searches planning, that's very intensive in terms of knowledge-based decision making. So that cannot be easily substituted, because if you do that wrong, then the whole process is going to be incorrect. And tools like this are more like a driver that is going to obviously eliminate the admin or those admin tasks and repetitive, or filtering the information or linking the information as well for traceability. But obviously, if you don't know how to do a search or an appraisal, obviously you need the experience of people like Katharina as well, or just to get training on how to do that as well better, for within your organization. So I hope you enjoyed the webinar. We want to finish with the 1 hour and on time. So thank you so much for everybody. Thank you so much, Katharina, for being with us. It's a pleasure, obviously, hearing your insights and your experience. And yes, I don't know, you want to say final words, Katharina?
And thanks for having me here. I think it was great to have this combination between, how you perform a literature search and also show a few features. And I'm also fine with answering some questions. Up to you.
Yes, we had a Q&A, right? So obviously we can answer those questions.
Sure.
I don't know if I can see in here, Q&A. We can answer those questions after. We have one. We can answer perhaps. Is it acceptable by notified bodies for one to have different search string formats across different databases?
Yeah, it is accepted. Actually, a few weeks ago, it was the first time where I received a question from a reviewer why I had different search terms for different databases. It was really the first time that someone asked it, but sometimes you really have to adapt the search terms for the different databases. Of course, not completely, but you have to adapt them. And what I now do is that I just added a short justification in my search protocol where I explained, okay, different databases work in different ways. And that's why it makes sense to have slight adaptations for your search strings. Yeah.
Absolutely. And from our side, we share the same message. As long as you can justify and add a rationale, no one can force you to review 10,000 articles because it's the one it gives you 10,000 articles and PubMed is giving you 100 for the same query. So obviously it has to be justified as well, why you include that specific database. That's always requested by reviewers, by auditors as well, why that specific database was considered to be included. So we don't have more questions. We wanted to finish on time, as we said. So thank you so much, everybody. Katharina, a real pleasure to have you here. And I see you very soon. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much for everybody who has attended this session. Thank you.
Thank you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a nice evening.